First is the impact on the environment in an urban London context. Second, whether a large hub airport is in the nation's interests, and arguments about London's connectivity. And the third point is on night flights and the need to remove this wholly unnecessary stain on the livability of our great capital city. On our precious urban environment in London, Heathrow, Mr Deputy Speaker, is already exceeding legal limits for pollution before any single plane has landed at the third runway. Heathrow is seeking an extra 28 million passengers to visit the airport each year, but somehow without a single extra car journey. And further, Mr Deputy Speaker, Heathrow hasn't identified yet the future flight paths, so it's impossible to tell who and where will be affected by this big increase in flights. There's an awful lot of Londoners, Mr Deputy Speaker, who currently have no idea that they will be overflown by planes every 90 seconds.
Right Honourable Friend, give way.
Of course.
I salute his principles on this issue. Would he agree on that point, that the lack of information in relation to where these new flight paths are going makes an absolute mockery of all the consultations that have been doing the rounds over the last couple of years?
Well, I wholly agree with my honourable friend, and it ought to be possible. It is perfectly possible to show where the flight paths are going to be or are likely to be. And I believe, and I conducted my own individual, Mr Deputy Speaker, both Heathrow and the Department for Transport initially refused to do a consultation in my constituency of Chelsea and Fulham. I eventually had them come, and even there they were unwilling to provide that basic information. And then, Mr Deputy Speaker, the pledge to build a freight hub. A freight hub. This is absolute madness. When we have excellent freight hubs already well away from population centres, like East Midlands Airport, like Stansted. Freight hubs you surely create away from population centres, not in the middle of urban environments. The Secretary of State's argument centres, Mr Deputy Speaker, on this essential proposition, that the UK needs a hub airport, and by implication only one hub airport to compete. And I fundamentally disagree. Mr Deputy Speaker, a hub airport suits Heathrow and it suits the British Airways business models, but those are not the same as the national interest. Mr Deputy Speaker, most hub airports tend to be in medium-sized cities, and there is a reason for that. I fundamentally believe that London is best served by its 5 airports, and here the difference is between an 8 to 10 million city or a 1, 2 or 3 million population city. New York, Mr Deputy Speaker, has 3 large airports. Moscow has 3 large airports. Tokyo, 2 large hub airports. Most successful hub airports are in medium-sized cities. The Secretary of State in Conservative Home said this morning Frankfurt and Amsterdam were his examples. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, these are 1 million cities. Both cities are less than 1 million population. They cannot generate that level of traffic themselves. They need to hub to create and boost their connectivity. It is not a choice for them. It is a choice for London and this country. So why should London prefer a set of orbital airports? The answer returns to the question of the size of London. This 8 million and growing population, travel times across London to one hub airport will very often exceed the median flight time of 2 hours. That is why, whilst Amsterdam and Frankfurt need a hub, London needs a set of orbital airports. The related question here, Mr Deputy Speaker, is on connectivity. And the question here is not just about Heathrow, but is actually about London's airports as a whole. Much has been made about Frankfurt and Amsterdam overtaking Heathrow in connectivity. But that only partly, Mr Deputy Speaker, that misses the point. What about London and the whole of the nation's connectivity? And actually, Heathrow is pretty well connected already. It may surprise people to know that there are currently 10 Chinese cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Changsha, Chongqing, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Qingdao, Sanya, Wuhan and Xi'an, that are connected directly to Heathrow each day. To London as a whole, there are 28 US cities connected to London airports. There are 13 Polish cities. There are 7 in India. More than all of these are more than either Frankfurt or Amsterdam. 8 in Canada, more than either Frankfurt or Amsterdam. And the growth of destinations served by London airports has been huge, Mr Deputy Speaker, and these have been point-to-point flights. So that is the direction of modern aviation, is in point-to-point direct flights. So we can drive, of course.
He's making an important point, and we've just seen the very first direct non-stop flight from Sydney to London. Does he agree with me that there is no reason for people to want to hub unnecessarily going forward, and therefore it's wrong to have a 20th century hub strategy instead of a 21st century direct strategy?
Well, Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend makes a very, very important point with the introduction of the first point-to-point flight from Australia to London. And it returns to my point about what is not just in my constituents' interests, but in London's interest as a whole and in the national interest. And I think creating this super hub at Heathrow, it clearly suits the interests of British Airways and the interests of Heathrow. And I'm nothing against, I'm a Conservative, I'm nothing against companies doing well. But we should not equate that with being the same as the national interest. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I promise to say a few words about night flights, because this is an area where, whichever was, of course.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and I respect the position that he finds himself in. Birmingham Airport could take 17 million extra flights now on the existing infrastructure, and that capacity could be unlocked if we actually built the high-speed loop originally proposed. Now, that loop would cost about half the cost that is proposed for the third runway, for the new runway at Heathrow. So shouldn't we look again at actually using high-speed rail to unlock capacity we've already got, rather than bring forward a proposal that will drain 43,000 flights from our airport?
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank him for that intervention, and I am a supporter of high-speed rail. And in terms of the sort of solutions that one could do with the money that's being spent here, I certainly think that is probably an example of the sort of thing that can increase the UK's connectivity as a whole. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, on night flights, this situation is untenable. There are allowed to be up to 16 flights each night, starting from 4:30 a.m. I hear these planes at 4:30. And my constituents, I get letters very, very frequently from my constituents. You can almost time the first flight coming over at 4:30. And this is done, Mr Deputy Speaker, for the interests of a few thousand people. These are important people. These are people travelling by business to do business from the Far East to come to this country. But nevertheless, we're talking here about a few thousand people measured against the convenience of many hundreds of thousands of people directly under those flight paths, many of whom, Mr Deputy Speaker, are some of the most economically productive people in this country, paying a lot of taxation, and therefore we should not ignore the interests of those people living directly under the flight path. So I believe, Mr Deputy Speaker, we need to ban night flights. 6 a.m. is early enough. So I believe, even if this proposal is to be adopted, the minimum quid pro quo should be the abolition of all arrivals before 6 a.m. and definitely not the stealthy smoothing. So finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've just outlined, I think, a few of the arguments against this. I think this proposal is fundamentally flawed. But this vote is also about integrity and about the pledges that we make to our electors. It is to be regretted that it's not a free vote. But I urge colleagues to vote against this proposal